Hello and welcome to Walking the Earth podcast. I'm Mike Margulies. Today I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm sitting here with my roommate, actually, Cindy Huang. How's it going?
It's going pretty well.
My roommate and also a woman of the world.
Wow, it's a heavy title.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty accurate. Actually, it's been really cool. You just moved into Baltimore from Richmond, actually, was it a month ago when you moved in?
Yeah.
It's really cool having you as a roommate because I think you do have different perspectives. I mean, you grew up in China, moved to the States at age what?
Between 8 and 9, I don't remember the exact time. Yeah.
Sweet, and also spent time in South Africa.
Yeah, I worked in South Africa for a TV station, which was really wild because you get to see a lot of what's happening in outside of the tourist areas and talk to people every day. So in a way, it's like you live an entire lifetime in that period of time. You know?
Yeah. Tell more about that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I remember leaving South Africa and I remember learning all about the problems of that country, the personality of the country, all the different languages people spoke, all the customs, like, for example, there's sundowners are really popular there. And sundowners are it's just drinking and eating on the beach while the sun sets. Like, it's a thing. There's a word
That's
for
awesome.
that there. It's so popular.
Why isn't that a thing here?
I don't understand why we don't get drunk to the sun going down every day. But so by the time I left, I just felt like that experience is like an entire lifetime.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I guess I understand that because traveling, there's so much density of new things happening all the time, and so you get like much more dense in a short period of time.
Yeah.
Of experience.
For sure.
Because you're like, I guess it's just nothing's normal, and you're in a different place, right?
Yeah, everything is new. Everything is bizarre, and you have to make sense of it. And I think it's different in when you go for a particular job, and I'm sure it's different for every job. But I had to come up with story ideas, so I had to be like, what's happening in South Africa that I can write about?
Right.
Which involved going out and talking to people. And I remember actually. So, like, one of the things I remember the most is the African National Congress, which is the primary party there, the party that overthrew the apartheid government Nelson Mandela's party.
Right.
I remember going to their rallies, and that's one thing here that I'll never forget. The political rallies in South Africa are like these giant, almost like, I hate using this word, but cultish party. Like, everyone is dancing, everyone is clapping, and you go to these rallies and you're like, you feel like you're in a church almost.
Yeah.
And that this is more than politics to them. This is like their identity. This is their life. They're giving their hearts out to this. And yeah, it's kind of like propaganda, yes. But I mean, imagine being on a campaign bus. And when it pulls up, everybody just runs out from their home and surround the bus and start dancing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's actually, it's funny, like the imagery of like the songs and dancing. It's reminded me a lot of like things that have been going on in Baltimore, like just now, like right now, been going on to all the protests in the the post riot kind of area. Right now, it's in Baltimore is Monday was when the big riot happened for Freddie Gray, and so the military is all around and other stuff, and there's a lot of things in the media that are showing that aspect of it. But on the ground level, it's like a celebration. There's like music and dancing, and it's just like this. That's the experience I've had the last few days walking around Baltimore City.
Yeah, I'm definitely following you on Facebook.
Yeah, trying to put something positive out there. I don't know. But I don't know, that just reminded me, the imagery that you're talking about.
Well, it's interesting because the first ever protest, and I won't forget this because this is the first protest I went to in Cape Town, and it was outside of a courtroom, and I'm not sure how familiar this term is, but corrective rape is
what?
Corrective rape is a problem in many parts of the world,
What
developing
is
world.
Corrective.
It is when it's when people are raped because of their sexual orientation. The idea that you can be corrected.
So you're a lesbian and you can be raped into being straight.
So that's like a
Holy
thing.
Shit.
So it was outside of a courtroom, and there was an advocacy group right outside, protesting, but they were singing and dancing. It was so bizarre to me because the issue was so dark. But it's sort of
Yeah.
like what you experienced. Like, I mean, what
Yeah.
happened with Freddie Gray? It's so dark, and
Yeah.
it's brought on so much anger and violence. But there's also this desire to come together.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
to channel that energy into something positive. And I don't
Yeah.
quite get it. I don't profess to know exactly what's going on, but that's sort of like my very like surface level outsider perspective on it.
Yeah, that's a really accurate view, and I'd say, like, yeah. So what happened is, like, it's a really terrible thing, but at the same time, I think that out of like darkness, comes a lot of light. So in our times of strife and things are happening that are bad, like that's where we have the even on like a personal level as a human being. When I go through things personally, like a really hard time, that's an opportunity to grow. And I think that's what we're going on. What's happening in Baltimore right now, from like a, just on a larger scale, right? Scaled up a little bit. As a community, we have this rough time going on, and I think it leads way to something beautiful. We all want that catharsis, right? We all want that beautiful reconciliation. We all want to, and that's what I've been seeing.
Well, it's also, I feel like, a showing of unity.
Yes, yes.
That's another big part of it.
Yes.
It's sort of like we're here, and yes, we can make noise and chant, but also like we can come together through song and dance
Yes.
too.
That actually yesterday was my favorite of all the different stuff I've been at this week. For the different protests. Yesterday, the cast of the musical Marley. So there's a musical coming to Baltimore about Bob Marley's life. The cast came out and they went to Pennsylvania and North, which has kind of been the epicenter of all the protest activity, and they were just singing Bob Marley songs, right? And I remember thinking, like, this is so perfect, It was just this one love, all the message that he was saying
Yeah.
such a relevant message today. And I just thought it's a great figure. Bob Marley's a good person to think of as far as, like, the ideal we're striving. But at the same time, there's also the sense of, get up, stand up
Yeah.
for your rights, which
yeah.
is all kind of, stand up for yourself, and, but as well, we all are trying to come together in love at the same time, in unity, and it's, I don't know, I found that to be really beautiful and cool.
And I don't think this is necessarily something new because, there's 60s protest music,
Yeah,
there's We
yeah.
Shall Overcome. Music has always been, like, I think, a way for people to, like, push back and fight for their rights. And I didn't know this, but, I thought, what is going on? Like, why is song and dance so important in not only politics, but the protest culture in Cape Town? And I was looking through some archive footages when the marches against apartheid, they were all there were so many footage of people singing and dancing on the streets
Yeah.
to overthrow apartheid, which is so not really the first thing you think of, because the first thing you think of is like the guerrilla, the gunfights,
Right.
But yeah, song and dance.
No, that's absolutely, and I think that's it's very similar right here. Yeah, you can see images in the news of buildings burning, all these things. There's also, like, what's happening is mostly song, dance, singing, and there's anger too, but it's all, like, I don't know. To me, there's just what I've seen being there is just this beautiful, mostly what you were saying, like the unity. Everyone's together.
Yeah.
We all want this thing. We all want to come together, and that to me has been the beautiful thing about this.
And I want to throw another perspective in there because when we talk about protests, I think I have an interesting Chinese perspective as well because, I'm sure everybody just thinks of China as like this government that's just so overwhelming that no one protests, but that's not necessarily true.
People protest. Well,
No, it just happens in such a subtle way in China.
Okay.
So, for example, I think this is one of my favorite stories to tell. A while back, I don't remember the dates, but there's a high-speed train crash in China, and the government didn't want social media to be talking about it. They wanted to control the narrative
Right.
of this train
Right.
crash. But people were trying to find out family members, how bad it was, where it was, and people started to like write what they know from their family, like onto
Like
these
tweet
different
it out or something.
Yeah,
Or-
well, not
well, I guess
Twitter,
you
it's
don't
Weibo.
Twitter, right?
It's like
Yeah.
the Chinese Twitter.
Okay.
And China started blocking certain words that you can use, like, for example, train, the time, the city. And what happened was
wow.
people started taking photos, screenshots of what they've written and uploading as a JPEG. And I think I love that story because there's these small ways that people are pushing back that don't
Right.
get recognized. Because we think of protests in such a, like everybody, like the Selma thing, but it doesn't all look like that, so
Yeah.
yeah, so I also find that interesting, and
I think that's beautiful. Like,
and people don't report on it, but there are small scale protests happening all over China against the government. You know?
yeah, I mean, I guess what I would hear about is like, Tiananmen Square, of course, and you hear these things, which is, it's weird because as an American, you think about Tiananmen Square and you're like, oh man, that's so crazy that the government would come with the army and all this stuff, and then you look around here in Baltimore and it's like, what's going on right now? There's helicopters in the sky.
I
And
remember
tanks
when
and
I was,
machine guns.
yeah, no, for sure.
And I'm like, wait, what?
I think there's a tendency to see everything through a Western perspective and forget how much the world overlaps.
Yeah.
There's sort of like an us and them, like, oh, this happens there, not here.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to someone, and I'm like definitely guilty of this. I mean, I grew up in China until I was 8, but I was mostly educated over here. And I was talking to this guy who worked for CCTV. And actually, my language skills wasn't on par enough to keep up with him because he was so smart. But I remember talking about how he felt being a journalist in a country where the press is controlled by the government. I'm like, I don't understand how you can do this. Like,
Right.
I mean, don't you feel like the purity of your job is being dirtied by the government? And he's like, well, why don't you look at yourself,
Right.
and how all your newspapers and TV are owned by big corporations.
Yeah.
And it's like how your message is sculpted by big interests, like big politics interests or big consumer interests. And I don't know. I mean, I took a step back and I'm like, okay, maybe they're not the same thing. I mean, I definitely think government saying you can't say this about us is definitively worse, but.
No, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I read an article the other day, actually. It was how Baltimore would be portrayed right now if it was in a different country. Like, what if this was in the Middle East somewhere, and you'd have some headline, you have the articles would say, well, the ethnic minority group, black people, has been jailed more than the ethnic majority group of the white people.
Yeah.
And the military has come in. Now, you'd have a whole different, think about how we portrayed the uprisings in Egypt, for example.
Right.
Right? And like...
The sex.
Yeah, there's... yeah, and so there's like a... we look at ourselves, I think, differently than we look at others. And it's just as an individual human too, right? Like, it's easy for me to like look at someone else and point out a different person's flaws. And what's much more hard is for me to look into myself and say, okay, well, where can I grow? And it's very easy to externalize the enemy, the other, and demonize someone else.
And to bring this back to lessons I've learned in other parts of the world, I think what you say is so true about self-reflection, because we take what our country, because I think we're always the norm, right? Like, what's happening to us, where we live, that's the norm. And maybe that part of that is the message is driven by what's around us. And part of that is just, our egos to think whatever we experience is like the norm. But I remember going to South Africa and reporting every single day we report on issues of poverty, whether it's getting clean water, getting toilets, getting electricity. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, we talk about these not only poverty issues, but like basic living issues all the time. And I think about coming back here,
right.
and how much we focus on middle class issues here. Here we talk about education, we talk about healthcare, and of course it is, in some ways an issue of the poor, but mostly the newspapers and the TV stations write for the middle class and write stories that interest the middle class. And I didn't realize that until I went to South Africa and spent all that time and see all these journalists covering the poorest of the poor.
Yeah. Well, it's really fascinating, actually. This is a really good point, actually, because you go to, say, countries where the poverty is much more on the surface. Like, so for me, I'll say I was in India, and there's a lot, you can just see it in front of you, a lot more. I think in the U.S., there is a lot of poverty that exists, but we just kind of like are almost blind to it. We just kind of like shove it in a corner, and sweep it under the rug, and we kind of don't pay attention to it. And there's whole communities of people that are affected. And I think that's what this is all about. There's communities of people that have been, I don't know, we're almost blind to sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's a bizarre thing for me this week, because my phone's been blowing up with people being like, "Are you okay? Like,
right.
I can't believe what's happening." and they're like, they tell me that they think what's happening is surreal. But what's surreal for me is driving home and seeing, like, young people run and families walk their dogs on the streets, and then I get to my apartment and turn on CNN and we're looking at streets with looting and burning, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, where do I, like, it's like two worlds happening
Yeah.
within a couple miles of each other. And that's what you go back to what you said. It's these, we're so separated. And of course,
Yeah.
like, you know, of course I live here, so I'm in a way part of the segregation, but, you know, but
Yeah, we live
just,
here. Well, we live here in like
we
Canton.
both live here in Canton.
Yeah,
yes.
which is in Canton is like the, mostly I'd say white, young, middle class, like yuppie kind of feel to it.
Yeah,
yeah, very different than if you go to like West Baltimore, and you just look at the condition of the houses, for example, or like it's just a completely different atmosphere.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, there is a lot of segregation, and that still exists today, and it's very.
Yeah, and you know, and these issues are definitely across the world. And because I remember talking to a reporter friend of mine in South Africa, it's the first time I was there, and she was telling me, by the way, if she listens, her name is Paula Chow. She's a brilliant journalist. I think she actually just moved here, but was a TV reporter for a long time in Cape Town, and she was telling me about how bizarre it is for her to go into these shanty towns. I mean, we're talking about towns where you have to walk to a toilet. You have to walk like a substantial distance to go to the bathroom. And, you know, a candle falls down and like 10 homes are burned because they're all made out of cardboard and tin. These whole, like everyone kind of builds their own little shanty home. And she said how bizarre is it to work out of those areas and then go home to her nice apartment, you know, with like exposed brick and crack open a bottle of wine. And I think I've noticed how much people joke about race and poverty in a very dark way as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So segregation definitely, like, it's not just an American problem, you know?
Oh yeah, I think it's everywhere, and I think in a lot of the conversations that we've been having recently, I think it comes down to like not understanding each other. There's a lot of miscommunication that happens, and like I don't know. I think one thing I'm going to try to do is like to maybe do some work that help the bridges. Maybe I can do a radio. I'm talking about a radio show in Baltimore, like to connect people from different communities and allow people to have a voice to express themselves in a safe space. And I don't know, maybe some small way that can help or something, but I'd like to see that world move in that direction where we all maybe really make an effort to see each other,
Yeah. Yeah, and these issues are across countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same stuff.
Yeah, I think it goes on everywhere in the world, and it's hard, right? Because we all come from different places. I mean, on the global scale, very obviously, we come from different places, speaking different languages. But even like within Baltimore City, so even within Baltimore City itself, it's one city in one country. There's enormous cultural gaps and living gaps and just conditions, just completely different ways that people grow up and experience reality just in this one small city. So if there's that much of a not understanding between people that exist in one place, think about the whole world, how much like not understanding there is between, say the U.S. and China, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like that just multiplies and magnifies, and
And it comes down to as simple as getting people to step outside of these invisible boundaries. I mean, it's actually invisible. I mean, we talk about countries, and there are military enforced boundaries between countries, but in Baltimore, people don't go. There are areas you just don't go to, and I mean, and I think the most recent example is D.C. I lived in D.C. for a year and a half, and there are parts of D.C. I would just never go to. Like, none of my friends went there. There are no events there, and I don't know what the solution to that is. I don't know like how you can bring people from one area of the city to the others, so that you don't have these pockets of poverty,
right?
And you don't have these just lack of this huge disconnect between people. That's part of it. You don't go there, you don't understand you don't talk to people there, like, and that's why I think people feel so disconnected.
Yeah.
Some people feel so disconnected, but I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know the answer. I don't think there's a magic solution, but I think when I look at it now, it's sort of like humans always fear what they don't understand, And so the more that and it's kind of a circular thing, right? Because I'm afraid of this part of town, for example, so I won't go there. So I don't understand the people, the humans there. And then that breeds more fear. And it's kind of this vicious circle where fear breeds not understanding, breeds more fear. And so how do we address that? Well, I think we cut it off at the pass, as just as much as we can as individuals. Like, okay, try to bridge these gaps. Like, open up the communication. Let's try to open up the communications. Allow people to help facilitate maybe people to better understand each other. I don't know there's any one magic solution that's like overnight we're all going to be like not segregated anymore. Everything's going to be equal. But maybe like step by step, slowly. We just, each of us as individuals, right? I speak for myself, right? I can try my best to try to bridge communication barriers and understand people that I don't understand. Like, rather than I see someone that is doing something that some part of me might have a reaction to and not agree with that, maybe I make an effort in my day-to-day life to try to understand that human being,
Yeah,
And
for sure.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think I'm speaking just for myself. I think it's sometimes really hard to let your barrier, we put up these walls, and we don't think we do, but we do.
Yeah.
I mean, we assume things about people, and we don't think we do, and we do.
Yep.
And I've met so many people that a couple days after meeting them, I'm like, wow, I made a lot of judgments about this person before I even spoke to him. But then I realized that, and I try not to do it again. And I think for a lot of people that I know, they don't come to the point where they realize that
It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to do. But it's our natural tendency to kind of like, we don't understand something, fear it, and anything that's bad, we want to put it on the other. We don't want to take responsibility. It's easier to say that person did something wrong than to say, oh, I had a perception that was maybe not completely informed.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a really, really difficult task. I really believe this though, because even here, on this thing, I've made a few things that I don't, for example, agree with the militarization of the city right now, the curfews and all these things, right? But I have to caution myself there, lest I go down the path of trying to demonize, like, well, it's the politicians and it's the police and it's the, I don't agree with systemically what's going on here. I think it's potentially a dangerous direction, but also could be a beautiful direction if we come together. But I know I've talked to individual National Guard members and police officers.
You're so right about that.
And they're all good people.
Yeah, people are good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like, so how, I guess for me, it's like a question of how do we address the fact that there is social change that needs to happen. We want to make positive social change without demonizing each other and pointing fingers and making blame at individual people as bad. But instead of, I guess maybe the question is, instead of telling people they're bad, how do we help people bring out the good in themselves?
Wow, if I had the answer to that.
I don't know. Open question. I ask myself this question. Well, actually,
we've strayed quite a ways.
We have.
My travels.
We have strayed away, but I guess it's just relevant to what's going on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your travels, though. Actually, we can come back. There's plenty to say about Baltimore, I'm sure, but I don't know. But I would like to, growing up in China, maybe you can even draw parallels to this. You can have a perspective, let's say, on communication gaps between, say, China and the U.S. Let's say, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm not exactly from a perspective of growing up in China. How do I feel? I don't know if I can answer that question.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, only because I haven't been following the conversations between U.S. and China.
Okay.
But I think what I can talk about outside of politics is how China is talked about in the West. So maybe it's similar, but not. Maybe it is similar.
Very similar.
Because I think we can never talk about a group of people in general ways. But then again, because of time constraints and because there's only so many there's only so many inches in a newspaper, so much time in the TV.
Personally, as a journalist, you only have so many
So we do that. We talk about what's happening in Baltimore. We don't talk about a block of people like they all have the same problems. They all suffer. They all think the same way. But because there's time constraints to how much how you can tell the story, we turn to tend to generalize, and I find that a lot. That's how people view China a lot. It's like they're either spoiled princes because of the one child policy with no desire for change because everybody's so focused on wealth and material they don't care about politics. Like that's one thing narrative I've heard of China. And the other narrative is these poor Chinese workers who are exploited and they live like 8 people to a bunk, and they barely get by, and so I find that a lot of it is really general, and they don't understand the complexity of these different kinds of people. And I remember this story a couple years ago. A video went viral of a Chinese girl who was hurt on the side of the road. I think a car hit her or something. She had an accident, and everybody drove by her and didn't help her. Wow. And then the whole narrative coming, being in America and watching it come through the American media channels was that look how callous China is. Look how apathetic they are. And then I remember I talked to a Chinese friend of mine who's actually Chinese, who moved here very recently, and I asked her why this is happening, why no one helped her. She said, well, that town is a very poor area, and in China you go to the hospital and you can't pay for care. They won't care for you. So there's a lot of context that was missed. Wow. And I think if we talk about communication, it's just like, maybe they see us as they see the U.S. as like cowboys and, right. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's what's lost. The context is lost, and therefore the communication is flawed.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I can draw parallels too. Like, it could be maybe there's a poor man on the street in the U.S. that is asking for help, and so many people walk by him. Is that any different than the person his car?
Yeah.
It's so we can.
I don't know. I don't know
either. But
that's an interesting point.
It's easy for us to look at China. Look how callous they are, and oftentimes I think when we criticize others, it's really something in ourselves.
Or it's like, look how much they pollute their rivers and their air.
And we're trying to feel better about ourselves in a sense too. And it's like, no, I think you're right though. There's just this, there is a lot, it's a lot of not understanding, and there's generalizations that come into it.
And I, as a reporter, one thing I think one of the most valuable lessons I've learned in the last year is how much history and context matters to a story. And I think that's why Ezra Klein, left the Washington Post to start Vox, because he wanted to write stories that had a lot of context in it, because things don't happen in a vacuum,
right?
And I think understanding so many people don't take the time to do that. I mean, for example, if you and I had a disagreement and we had a fight, right, over something, I think it's so easy to be like, oh, Mike is a jerk, or like, oh, Mike is just being stupid.
Cindy's terrible.
Yeah, but then I could find out why does this annoy you? Like, what in the past has caused you to be irritated about this thing? And I'm speaking abstract here, but I think you know what I mean.
No, I know. There's complexities to a situation. It's never just like this one person did this thing and it happened on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
There's all kinds.
You have to understand.
And that's really relevant to say the riots here. It's like
oh my god, that's so relevant. Context and history.
Yeah, exactly.
So many people miss that.
Yeah, there's this tendency to be like, oh, there's these rioters, and that as though there's a few bad apples in there, and we write it off until they demonize some people. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum. These riots are they're more a symptom of something deeper than they are just something that happened. They aren't just something that just happened. They are a symptom of something, and I think it's very easy maybe to there's a lot of times where the people that are in many ways the most powerless and victimized of all are being blamed, when in this system as a whole, these riots happened, but maybe that human being who physically set the fire was maybe the most powerless and victimized person of all. I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when reporters write these stories, it's so important to go at it from more than one angle. Because I do, it's not, I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to speak as an outsider. I'm always very hesitant, to speak as an outsider. And part of it's just because, I'm a reporter. I'm so afraid I'll get it wrong, you know? But I think like, God, as much as people shy away from complexity and we want to see things in a very straightforward way,
Right.
there's just no way.
The world's a complex,
There's just
interconnected.
no way, especially what's happening now. There's just no simple way to understand who's right and who's wrong. And I feel for so many people, and they're not just the riders or the families of the police officers, And I think like it's everyone's problem. It's not.
It is.
You
It
know.
is. And I'm I also feel for, okay, so I'm going to sit there and I'll empathize with the guy who lit the fire. I'm also going to empathize with the 6 police officers. Here's a crazy thought that most people won't, maybe haven't thought about, but the 6 police officers that have been arrested.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a terrible thing what happened to Freddie Gray, but I worry that these people are being scapegoated in many ways. There's this, again, it's a sense of, it's the other. Well, there are these 6 bad apples, and we tend to like find the bad humans and say these are the bad humans that are the cause of it, rather than looking at the system as a whole. Like, what is going on? We're all interconnected. We're all part of this. It's not like it was just that one guy who lit a fire, or it's that one cop who killed this person. Like, and we like to try to, again, we push it in a corner and say it's this person, it's this, and we don't look at it. We'd say we isolate ourselves from it, but it's like maybe we understand that we're all kind of part of this whole interconnected system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels so daunting to be like, oh, how are we gonna fix, people who feel isolated and neglected, who feel like the resources that are available to you and me are not available to them. Like, it just feels so big, and I feel overwhelmed thinking about it. But I think it comes down to just what you were saying, small things. It's not a Russian literature theme, this idea of like small kindnesses.
Yeah.
And small change is ultimately the biggest way to get to revolution. And so on an individual level, it's just attempt to understand someone who you haven't understood before.
Yeah.
Think of something you haven't tried to understand, someone you have never tried to talk to before.
Yeah.
Read a news blog that you never read because you don't think you agree.
Yeah.
Like maybe you read I don't know, a conservative news blog if you're a liberal, or maybe you read a paper that comes out of a niche paper. Maybe an LGBT paper, or maybe it's an African American paper, but read something that you don't typically read. Like, just start there. It's so simple, but I think it helps.
And talking to different humans that you see in your everyday life that you wouldn't have talked to, Like, I absolutely agree with you. We all, like, it's in ourselves. We each individually have a lot of power to make change. And, an individual is not going to change the world, but well, maybe you do in a ripple effect way, because we are all connected. So as an individual, I'm doing things, people around me are doing these things, and so I think this is the way that we can progress social changes. Like, and it's not in trying to prove who's right or wrong. You read someone a different point of view. It's not to like. I think for me at least, I try to read it when I'm on my game and I'm acting, in good ways.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to empathize, understand, where this human's coming from.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Good thoughts. All right. So now I'm going to turn it around and ask you a question personally.
Okay.
And the question I ask at the end of these episodes
Okay.
is, what's something that you would like to do in your life that you haven't done yet?
What's something that I like to do in my life? Wow. Well, like places to go, anything.
Anything in the universe.
Anything in the universe. Huh.
Or it could be something very simple, something you want to do tomorrow.
Well, I always had this thought of how cool would it be to I've never road tripped before. Believe it or not, I've never road tripped before. I've never like gotten into a car and driven from one city to another, eating like whatever local diner there is. And I've always wanted to, the Great American Road Trip. I think it's there's such an iconic like feel to doing something like that. I've never done it before. So something I hope to do. Now I think this year my vacation is booked up, but next year maybe I'm gonna be like, next year my goal is save 10 days of vacation.
Yeah.
And plan something like that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I think that's awesome. Actually, our friends Adam and Alex are going to be coming back from a road trip. They could probably give you some tips too.
Yeah. And there's so many ways you can do media projects. Like maybe you take a recorder.
Yeah.
And every diner you go to, you talk to someone. I don't know, but like
that would be cool. Talk to a different human being at different places along the way.
Yeah, I remember last year, the year before that, I did a story about photographers who document the American road. Right. Some of them focused on landscapes, like what does a landscape look like from the inside of a car. Others did roadside attractions like gas stations, diners. But the idea is like, this is how we experience America now. Like you experience America in a car, and it's not. I remember like old America is portrayed as like this majestic wilderness, like put the bald eagle over these really beautiful nature scenes. And then what these photographers are saying now is, yeah, not everyone just sees these great parks anymore. Like people mostly see America on the highway.
Right.
So I always thought, well, I would love to do a project. I haven't thought of what it would be, but just go on a road trip and do a project documenting it.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds interesting to me. I'd watch it.
I have one audience member. So,
yeah.
So far.
I don't know, and it's to the same things we've been talking about. Like you talk to different people all around this country, for example. That's a whole bunch of different perspectives.
That's great. Yeah.
And so I
think something like that.
I think that's beautiful and awesome.
Thank you for asking me that question.
Yeah, thank you for having a great answer. Cool. Awesome. Well, any parting thoughts, wisdom?
Well, okay, I'll say a couple of things before we go, because I think this is, if anyone's a listener who follows to the end, and I know in this day and age, like I write for newspaper, I don't even know who reads the last sentence.
Right.
But if you go, like Cape Town's the most beautiful place I have ever been. We're talking about like mountain ranges next to oceans, low clouds. Like it's stunning. It like actually it sounds so corny, and I hate saying this, but it like almost made me cry one day, and so I would say like you have to go. It's just so beautiful. And the other thought I have is about food in China. I think like every time I go from China to America and I go to a grocery store, I feel like I'm like, why don't we sell more do you know there's so many more vegetables you can eat? There's like I would say probably there's like at least 50 more types of vegetables that aren't sold at your Safeway in China that people in China eat on the regular. Because every time I go there, like I go to the supermarket, there's just so many more options, and I don't understand why we don't eat them here.
Yeah,
I think it has to do with marketing or something. But anyway, that's my thought on China. If you go to China, just pay attention to how
and eat your vegetables.
Yeah, vegetables. Go to a supermarket in China and just notice how many more options you have for food. It's absurd. It's ridiculous.
That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I felt like I eat a lot more fruit and vegetables when I was out in India and Southeast Asia, actually, than I do in America.
Yeah, fruits too. There are a lot of weird fruits. Yeah, I mean, not weird, but just not marketable in the U.S. apparently.
Yeah, we're much more, I guess, meat focused, grain focused. I don't know. It's an interesting observation.
We do have like 1,000 flavors of yogurt.
Yeah, that's true. Cool. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much
for doing this project.
Oh, no, my pleasure. It's really fun, and it's good. I'm glad to have had a conversation with you in a different context, actually, than just when we're sitting here, because I think we talked about a lot of things that we haven't even talked about yet. So this is really cool.
That's true.
So yeah, thanks for sharing so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everybody at home for listening to Walking the Earth podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes or SoundCloud or Stitcher. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter at WTE Podcast, and our website is WTEpodcast.com, where you can find all this info and maybe some links to things we mentioned in this episode too. We'll post those up there as well. WTEpodcast.com. Thanks again for listening. Mike and Cindy here from Baltimore, saying goodbye for now. What do you say? How do you say goodbye in Chinese or in
it'd be 再见.
Okay, cool. And do you know any of the local dialects?
I really wish I did not.
Okay, cool. Well, farewell. Namaste. May the force be with you all.